Labour have been ramping up their attacks against the insurgent Greens, led by Zack Polanski, and Keir Starmer has sort of put the boot in, giving this quote to The Observer over the weekend. So he said, "They're anti-NATO at a time when the world is more volatile than it has ever been. The Green Party thinks it's all right to sell drugs and there should be no restrictions. So somebody could sell drugs outside my children's school. But if you're a landlord, it should be unlawful. That's nuts. They're dangerous." No, I mean, this is just so patently dishonest. The idea that anyone who's... I think there are strong arguments actually against legalising all drugs, because I think I can see why, for people who are already taking drugs, harm reduction is good. You know, people will always take drugs, and there are huge costs to it being illegal. But I do think it's, you know, if you legalise them, people will take them more, and with some of the harder drugs, you kind of really don't want that. So I think it's perfectly legitimate to have different positions on whether drugs should be decriminalised. But the idea that the kind of policies Zack Polanski would introduce means that there'll be people legally selling drugs outside someone's children's school is just fanciful. It's just made up, and Keir Starmer knows it's made up. At the same time, you can see why someone's told him choose these, because these are the unpopular Green policies. The majority of the country wants to remain in NATO. The majority of the country doesn't really want to, well, definitely doesn't want to decriminalise all drugs. So those are the policies he's going for, but he's making the attacks in a very dishonest way. A slightly more effective attack line against Zack Polanski concerns something he said on Question Time last week.
Most people in this audience and watching this at home will have had an experience of a care worker. 1 in 5 care workers are foreign nationals. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't particularly want to wipe someone's bum. And I'm very grateful for the people who do this work, this really important work, whether it's in the care sector, whether it's in the NHS.
So that was one of the many ways on that show. The whole show was about immigration. That was one way Zack Polanski tried to defend immigration to the UK. He's been widely accused of being disrespectful in that answer to both immigrants and care workers, which are two often overlapping groups. Labour MP for Stratford and Bow, Uma Kumaran, said this: "An insulting and demeaning worldview. Black and brown immigrants aren't here to do the jobs that people like Zack Polanski think are beneath them. There is dignity and value in care work. That's why Labour has introduced a historic fair pay agreement for social care workers." Wes Streeting also got involved. So he said, "Social care isn't just wiping someone's bum. It is a hard, rewarding, skilled professional job. That's why we're delivering the first ever pay agreement in social care and building a care profession. This is immigration as exploitation." Now, I have to say, actually, I feel for Zack here, because I have said something similar on this show before. I can't remember exactly when, but what I do remember is getting an email from someone who was a care worker pointing out that I had said something along the line of wiping someone's bum, and they thought that that was very offensive. So I wrote back saying, "Oh my God, yeah, I'm really sorry. I said that. That's a silly way to articulate myself." So I can see how it happens. But clearly that was a bad answer from Zack Polanski. Barry, what do you make of Labour's attacks on the Greens, and I suppose specifically the person of Zack Polanski?
Yeah, well, you know, I think Zack Polanski himself has said it a lot, and many other people have said it. He has everybody rattled, and that's why everybody is attacking him. I was struck on Question Time, which I think was his second appearance on Question Time, how people seemed to have come with prepped attack lines. You know, they were ready to try to take him down on the show. The Observer, the interview that Keir Starmer gave in The Observer, though, was completely disingenuous. Like you've just said, he knows that the Greens don't want to allow people to sell drugs outside outside school gates. It's completely absurd, and that it just makes me come back to this problem I always have with the way British politics is covered, and increasingly with the way British politicians are conducting themselves. There's actually a really interesting policy debate to be had there if anybody wants to have it. You know, you say that you disagree with the legalisation of all drugs. I'm actually an advocate for the legalisation of all drugs. Me and you could have a constructive debate about that. Wouldn't it be great if Labour and the Greens could have a constructive debate about that? But instead, Keir Starmer goes out in The Observer and tells a lie, and I just feel like it's the sort of, like, look, politicians have always lied, but it's getting to the point now where we're looking at the magnification of British politics. With the carer thing, I think Zack Polanski really misspoke there, and I think it was incredibly clumsy. Look, it's reductive to say that care work is about wiping people's asses. It's also problematic to make the argument that immigration is a net good to the country because immigrants will do the jobs that you don't want to do. You know, that is not why we should advocate for immigration being a net positive to the UK. However, we know that Zack Polanski cares about social workers and care workers. We know that because people surfaced clips of him speaking passionately about them years ago, before anybody knew who he was. His boyfriend works in palliative care. He's spoken about that too. So that's what we know. We know where he really stands, despite the fact that he made a clumsy statement. And so to see Labour politicians coming out en masse with this attack line, it was galling because it was so hypocritical. And you imagine that some kind of a WhatsApp message went out and said, okay, go out and hammer him on this. And I just think it's absurd for politicians who, you know, have not introduced any policies to make the life of particularly immigrant care workers who are routinely exploited in this country better. And then to go after Zack Polanski for a clumsy choice of words. So, you know, they're being disingenuous. Stammer was disingenuous. The attacks on Twitter about the care worker comment were disingenuous. And all it tells me is that people continue to be rattled by Zack Polanski.
I mean, in terms of they haven't done anything for care workers, they are, in their employment rights bill, they are introducing a fair pay agreement, which they're putting £500 million towards. And I think it's going to be the first sector with collective bargaining. Obviously, the devil will be in the detail. It will sort of remain to be seen what comes of that. But yeah, I suppose they would say that that is one of the places where they have taken some action.